to build healthy and equitable communities. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Meg. So walk audits or mobility audits, what was the new term that you used, Meg?
Move
Audits. All right. Active. Make it active. I like that. So
Tyler was sharing that he talks about cruising. If he is not in his car, Tyler mentioned that he's cruising. So just different ways for us to think about how we move through space that are more inclusive. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. So like Meg mentioned, we held a move audit, an inclusive move audit around the downtown area during the downtown master planning sessions. And it really helped open a lot of people's eyes to some of the challenges that are faced by people living with disabilities. And specifically, the Higgins Bridge is currently under construction. That audit helped inform and determine the imperative for getting a accessible route to Caras Park during construction and afterwards. As a result, a ramp is now, it's not part of the Higgins Bridge construction project, but it's being shown on plans by the Parks Department and by the Downtown Association. There's really an understanding now of the importance of connecting surface streets to the bridge in the most direct and equitable manner. And then the other benefit that it had is some of the participants on that move audit included city engineers and engineering technicians who review private development projects, and it gave them the tools to be better reviewers for accessibility concerns when those projects come through. And so while I don't have specific locations in mind, I've been in meetings where I've heard engineering techs say, oh gee, these curb ramps, the curb cuts are pointed out into the diagonal instead of on the face of the curb. Maybe we can move those a little bit and better serve people who are vision impaired and things like that. And so the benefit from just from a community perspective is that they help, don't want to use an ableist phrase, but open the eyes of people who are otherwise not aware of some of the issues that people with disabilities are faced with every day. And so we continue to try and do better. I'm sure that Travis, if he's here, can point to lots of instances where we get it wrong. And it's always helpful for us to learn through a tool like this to be on the ground, trying to experience the facilities that we're planning for, that we're building, through the lens of someone who might have different mobility challenges than we do.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate that. And we'll be hearing throughout the session, this is Meg, about other values that we've heard of for this particular tool and this particular approach from different perspectives. And together we've been working with Mark Fenton, who's gonna move us forward to really understand what this tool is. So Mark?
Hi. Thanks, Meg. So I'm going to ask if somebody can make me a co-host so that I can share my screen, because I'll move through my slides with more alacrity, if I may. So I've had the great good fortune of working with many of the people on this call, but in particular, I want to acknowledge Emily's great work to bring us to this moment, Meg and Kathy Kostakis, who I've worked with for years through the physical activity, the work in physical activity promotion, and Meg and my friend Karen Korb, who have really been mentors to me around moving from what we just used to call walk or walkability audits to this idea of inclusive interdisciplinary walk move audits. And I'm going to say this, I thought I was a real innovator when I started talking about interdisciplinary audits, how we have to get planners and engineers and housing and transit people and economic development, you know, across the disciplines of, say, policymakers and decision makers, the influencers of the environment. What happened was, if you do that, that's great, but what you're missing is the people with the lived experience of using the environment. And the inclusive, the other I of an I2 audit, is turned out to be extraordinarily enlightening for me, because I think about inclusion across things like race and age and income level and ability and disability. There are so many spectra across which we have to be more inclusive. And it's really been a very rewarding experience for me to learn from the kind of folks that I'm now routinely doing walk audits or move audits with. So having said that, I'm going to, I hope, grow this screen to make it a nice big one that you guys can see. That's from an audit training that we did in Helena, where a range of people of different backgrounds and across disciplines. So we had public works represented and planning and some of the folks from the city, as well as folks from an independent living organization, and lots of different perspectives and lived experiences that I think really heightened the quality. And now, as a matter of course, when I have the occasion to do an audit anywhere in Montana, I think that they are a different experience than they would have been a decade ago. And I bet Kathy and Meg would say the same thing. Purely because of the very conscious and intentional effort to do the I2 part of the walk move audit, you know, both of those I's, inclusive and interdisciplinary. So I want to talk really briefly about basic principles of healthy design, some basics of move audits learned from many years of doing them. So I have been doing what we would have called walk audits for something like 25 years now. I think some of those lessons are useful. And then what we're doing during the pandemic when we have to do this stuff virtually. I'd just love to give a couple of tips around that, if I might. So a quick primer, if you were to say, what does the research say about environments that characterize where we tend to see more active transportation, people opting to walk, to bike, to take transit, to use the non-motor vehicle modes, let me say it that way. We would see a greater mix of land uses, different kinds of destinations closer together, a good network of connecting facilities, sidewalks, bicycle lanes, a quality transit network. The details of site design would be functional and rewarding for all users and not just for the automobile driver. In other words, the building is up at the street versus up at the sidewalk versus set back behind a giant parking lot. And all those attributes you see in the lower right picture, like street trees and awnings and benches, are really, really an important piece of that. And of course, it would be fully accessible and safe for all users across, again, age, income, race, disability. In other words, it would work for everybody, fully functional. Okay, so that's kind of where the research sends us. And I say those four things because they're important, because when I'm leading in a move audit, I have to routinely remind participants of that. A typical in-person audit might have been as much as a mile to a mile and a half to be out for about an hour. We tended to get to real places, as we'll do today when we do the virtual one, you know, real destinations that people might walk to. And importantly, it is an act of shared discovery and solutions. So this is important because it speaks to how you participate. The goal is not for an expert or for one opinion to dominate the conversation. When we stop at a location on a walk in the real world, I make sure that everybody has an opportunity to share. I even say, throw out your number from 0 to 10. How supportive was this? 0 if it's not at all supportive, 10 if it's great. Everybody shouts their number out and I'll say, okay, now why did you give it that? But we don't encourage anybody to give a very lengthy soliloquy. The goal is not for anyone to dominate the conversation, but rather to share in a collective sort of way. So we would often start with a 10 or 15 minute sort of setup, go out and do the movement through the environment and discuss solutions. Now we've started adding an option for those that don't want to go out in the environment, if you will, a virtual version of that. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So when we were doing this audit in Auburn, New York, we went quite specifically started and finished at their, we could have started at City Hall in sort of the planning offices, or we could have started at their social services center, which served a lot of the folks that would normally perhaps been left out from this conversation. And so we did the latter to make sure that that level of encouragement and welcome was made clear as we walked around the community. And I'll say this again, I'm constantly reminding participants of the 4 elements that encourage active movement in the environment. And that's because people often will focus on the network. Here's the sidewalk, but it's lacking a curb ramp. Here's a crack in the sidewalk. Here's where, you know, it got too narrow. That's great. We have to talk about the network, but we also have to talk about destinations. Are my daily needs, even within a distance then I can move to them. And the details of functional site design, the bench, the tree that provides shade on a hot day in the summer, awnings on the building front. So at the macro scale of land use and the micro scale of placemaking, as well as the meso scale of network, we want to constantly encourage the participants to think about all of those. And I'll encourage you to do that. The other thing is that we want to capture their experiences. So often at the end, we'll have the flip chart, right? We return to a room after our walk through the environment and talk about what we call the 3 Ps, the programmatic stuff, outreach, education, and events, physical projects and infrastructure changes, and policy change. And to me, the gold standards are the last one. In other words, I'd love a community to make this street more a complete street, but I'd rather them pass a complete streets policy so that they do it all the time. So we're constantly churning on that as we do our work. Mark, we can't get out there now. I can't convene 10 or 12 people. Or I've got a person who can't join us at the time we're going for our walk. So we're using a tool called Photo Voice to do more of that. Photo Voice simply is take pictures and add a caption, Photo Voice. So a very simple assignment I've often given people is take 2 to 3 photos of things you think encouraging active movement through this environment, 2 or 3 that are challenges, and maybe even a surprise. The photos from the bottom of the Crow Creek Sioux Reservation in Fort Thompson, South Dakota, where as a workshop, I asked them to submit some Photo Voice. And they talked about, again, some of the positives, the trail, the prayer circle, the flags as a destination, but also challenges, the state highway that goes through the reserve that they haven't even painted the curb line here, or the fog line that would delineate the shoulder that might be a walkable or a bikeable space, but without that marking, much more dangerous. Or the overgrown sidewalk there that is problematic. When we were working with Idaho, so state next door, I was doing a healthy community program with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation, in which mayors come to an event. We had them do Photo Voice ahead of even arriving. So this mayor, for example, pointed out the nice wide sidewalks and the great bike racks, but he also was disappointed that the sidewalk ended at the end of the downtown project area, or that business owners were putting up no skateboarding signs, even though skateboards are used by a lot of youth as transportation, right? They're not just a recreational device. He was pleased to see a cyclist and frustrated that he wasn't on the road because they hadn't provided an appropriate bike facility. He was pleasantly surprised that their 1.5 mile trail was getting a ton of use because it connected to downtown to a regional park. Here's my point. He arrived at the workshop far more ready to participate simply by having been asked to go out and do this exercise, to look at the environment through this lens and take these photos. So sometimes it can be that very learning experience or awareness building experience that Ben alluded to before. I want to just mention briefly that I've been working with students a lot. The New York State Alliance of YMCA's had a student ambassador program around their Safe Routes to School program. Angela Gray did a beautiful job of showing us positives, the bike share, the crosswalks, the curb ramp here, but also where snow ice hadn't been cleared, the lacking sidewalk, or the trash that had accumulated, or the fact that students used alleyways as a shortcut. They were a preferred route for some of the walking routes through the neighborhoods. Students bring a perception that you might not get from adults. And indeed, I suggest that anytime you can reach out to youth, and don't be afraid, my experience, to reach out to even middle and high schoolers. In other words, I'm not just talking university level students, I'm talking about middle school kids participated in this program. So 7th and 8th graders, and added so much. You know, they know where there's not a place to park their bike and how they have to stick it behind the building, or the desire lines, or what some might call goat trails, those worn pathways where pedestrians navigate because no accommodation has been created to get from the backside of the school to the mini mart and the neighborhood over here. So I'm finding them to be a wonderful asset. Jack Clifton, who was a participant in this program, decided, all of the students, in fact, were going to come to a live training, then go home and do live walk move audits, and weren't able to because of COVID. So they did virtual ones. This young man actually used Google Forms, created a form that's much like what we're going to do today. So that's why I show this. He invited city officials and others, residents, anybody he could get, frankly, lots of his friends took part. You'd go in, identify yourself. He had a little introductory video. He talked about the 4 elements, including land use and site design, not just the network, safety and access for all. He mapped out where you were going to traverse on the actual audit, and then he would have a video clip followed by asking you to score it. Another video clip, scored this section. Another video clip. So he did these several clips. Each time afterwards, he'd ask you to score it and then say, why did you give it that score? What improvements might like you to see to move that up? That might be what we would replicate had we been all together out walking together, and he was trying to do that as best he could virtually. I thought there was a lot of creativity here. He got feedback from municipal leaders, and indeed now sits on their community's active transportation committee. He is the first student representative to it. This committee did not exist. His actions sort of helped stimulate that. One last tool, Stanford University is developing as we speak, and I was lucky enough to work with them in San Mateo, California, with a tool called the Our Voice app. It's an app that you load onto your phone. The idea is that it allows you to take a photo, essentially do a photo voice-like exercise. Take a photo around your community. So we invited participants in this community of Sunshine Gardens, south of San Francisco, in South San Francisco, actually. We invited parents, students, other stakeholders in the community, residents, faculty, staff, to go out and take photos. Add a comment, so that's the photo and the voice, and then you upload all of those when you're back to internet. So you don't need internet access while you're doing this. You have to have internet to download it, but they could come to the school to do that. And in fact, the school made tablets available to people who didn't have them. A number of residents did not. We also made a Spanish language version of the entire interface, which is an amazing amount of work on Stanford's part, but they did it. And we did introductory workshops in both English and then a night later in Spanish. So there was a real attempt to reach out to many of the members of the community who we later learned as we talked to folks, and in particular the principal of the school, participants who might not have taken part had they been asked to come to a live gathering. But because they were able to do this, come to the school, get a tablet, take the photos, upload them at the school's internet or at a local McDonald's, anywhere they had free internet. We got great feedback from them, and we got lots of stuff like photos like these, which were geotagged to actual locations. This is the map of the area. And they could make these kinds of comments, love this crosswalk, or there's a crosswalk needed here. All of these residents have to get across to the BART station, which is transit. And based on what they put in, we came up with these 8 themes. In other words, it wasn't Mark Fenton, the expert guy, telling you, here are the things you got to work on. It was the residents' collected images, their collected experience guiding what intervention would look like. And I think that's always what we're looking for, is to get the collected experience of the participants to be, at the shared discovery and the shared problem solving. So I'll conclude by reminding you that we're always trying to get as many users of different lived experience involved, and in different disciplines, from the standpoint of those who can, are involved in decision making. This scoring exercise is a way to sort of let everybody throw their idea out, and everybody respecting everybody else's input. I as a facilitator, I never let people say, well, Public Works have been jerks because they haven't been clearing the snow. That's not constructive. Say, the snow doesn't get cleared, we have to find a way to get that snow cleared. Or this ramp is built incorrectly. We've got to think about what we're going to have to do to change, even if it's changing policy and practice, to get these ramps built properly, as opposed to blaming and finger pointing, which really is non-productive. So to that end, I'm going to take a breath. I think someone's going to give us some perspective on our routes here. So I'm going to stop sharing so that you guys can take control again of the slides and think about how we go on a virtual audit around approaching and then around campus.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think that was a really good overview, and it'll be interesting to see how those 4 elements that you mentioned play into this this virtual route that we have selected. I want to thank Emily and the rest of the organizers for coming up with the concept of a kind of a model day in a student's life. Starting by visiting a friend along the Greek row of homes on Daly, and going down Daly to Arthur, hooking a right on Arthur, heading to the intersection at University Ave by the Lomason Center, heading directly into the Oval and the center of campus. And that's where kind of the second segment takes over. The second segment then goes to various classrooms, get some coffee at gee, I'm forgetting what that little one by Yuri Hall is called now, but like the Brain Cup or something like that. But and then around campus, go to the UC, go to the gym, go get a flu shot at Curry Health Center, and then head back kind of off campus or towards off-campus housing, say at Lewis and Clark villages, by going down Maurice. I'm not going to be able to be here, unfortunately, for the whole time, but I just want to highlight a couple elements to keep in perspective as that these pictures might not show, particularly as segment 3, Maurice Avenue has recently been we've had some, we're calling them quick response traffic calming added. So there's some traffic calming circles along Maurice Avenue. I don't know that it did a ton for accessibility, but it certainly has helped calm traffic on that street and create sense of place as a nearby neighbor saw the kind of blank canvas of a new painted circle in the street, and she painted a giant mandala in the middle of the mural. It's very beautiful, and as a result, other neighbors have gone and taken chalk to the other circles that have been put in. So it really is kind of starting to build community around the idea of being active in the street. So I want everyone to keep that in mind. With that, though, we'll move to segment 1 and kind of the route to campus. And I do have a few minutes, so I might be able to help talk through the slides, unless, Meg, you were planning on someone else talking through them. I'm happy to cede the floor.
Take it away, Ben.
Okay. Well, yeah, if we want to go to the next slide. So we're starting at, say, Daly and Gerald. And some of the things that I look at as an engineer or as a planner and who works with engineers and thinks about safety as kind of the primary lens that I'm looking through. One of the things that I see in that central slide, the one on the right, is that there's a big wall on the side of the road right at the back of the crosswalk. And so that's something that we see. But you look down Daly Avenue and you see tree-lined streets with boulevard sidewalks. There might be curb cuts, although it doesn't look like they fully meet current ADA guidelines. There's, in the picture on the left, is a little bit further, closer to campus. As you can see, and when this picture was taken, the street had recently been chip sealed by the Public Works Department. That's a layer of oil and gravel that get put on the street to help preserve the pavement so that we don't have to rebuild the roads fully as quickly. But I don't want to spend too much time making my observations. I want to open it up, but I figured with this first one, I wanted to start by mentioning some of the things that we're looking at.
That's so great, Ben. This is Meg. One of the things that I've learned from Mark is just a little bit about how we create some discovery amongst the group members, sharing information. And I love that video for the DiverseU, you know, how we really are doing reflective listening. And so as we move through, the virtual space challenges us because we want to include people who are blind and low vision. So to some extent, we have to be visual interpreters. And yet we have a hard time doing that in a very objective way, so that people can have their own self-discovery and be identifying those things that are most important to them about building out a healthy community, or things that they notice that they really want to elevate in the conversation. As we move through segment 1, at the end, we'll come to a point where we intentionally try and facilitate that conversation. And Emily has set up a great poll, and we have borrowed from Mark's strategy where we rate things from 1 to 10. Again, really highlighting those 4 elements that Mark talked about. We're thinking about, is it a 10 in terms of connectivity? Are there routes that I can take as a walker or a biker, a bus in Missoula, and things that I can connect to without getting in my car, and then the safety and access things that Ben is talking about, as well as, are there things I want to get to? Is there a mixed use or in this space, or can I find a healthy place to eat? Can I mail something? Can I go to school? Are there affordable places to live? All within a footprint in this route that we'll be exploring together. And then the last one is, am I rewarded for being there? Is it a pleasant place to be? What are the things that I really like about it? And just be thinking about those 4 elements. So as we move through the space that Ben is gonna, I love that you're here, Ben, to describe from your perspective the space that we're moving through together on this first segment of the route. At the end, we'll ask you to put in that poll that Emily created, the 1 to 10 rating, and then be asking you some other questions. So just to prime people, and obviate some of the challenges of making the virtual format accessible to people, being visual interpreters, but again, doing our best. You'll hear us self-checking ourselves, trying not to bias people about the things that are important to us from our own lens as members of an interdisciplinary team. Tyler, is there anything you would add just as we move through this space?
No, I mean, it looks like, I know that one thing we're looking at is efficiency. And I know this looks like a nice straight shot towards campus. So as far as all the students heading that direction, it seems like just from this limited view, it looks like it would be a nice clean shot down there, efficient way to get to class.
Great. Tyler, do you mind just, Tyler's going to be representing this kind of co-facilitated overview of segment 1. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Tyler?
Yeah, my name is Tyler Stosich, and I'm an independent living specialist with Summit. I'm a C3 quadriplegic, and I use a power chair. And so I'm not as familiar with this route, but I was on campus for 4 years and got to bomb around out there quite a bit and see some of the pluses and minuses of how it's laid out. And, so yeah.
Great. And I just got a text from Chris Siller, who has done a lot of these inclusive interdisciplinary move audits with us in the state. He is a master's degree level trained orientation mobility specialist. And he is blind himself, and he travels the state really giving skills to people of all ages who are blind and low vision on how they can navigate the community. Use what we call mobility orientation skills. He can't be here. Unfortunately, I just got that text, but we'll do our best to draw knowledge from the group on what additional perspectives the blind and low vision community bring to building out equity and integrating solutions from that community and how we build our built environment. Okay, great. So Ben is gonna take us through some more photos representing segment 1, providing some kind of visual description that we hope don't bias you on your scores. But go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep my discussion as brief as possible because I don't want to make all the observations. But like I said, I did want to just lay out some of the things to look for in that first one. The other piece about this is that if we were in person walking through this, we would have all sorts of side conversations along the way about things that we observe that will then help help inform the scoring at the end. So people should feel free in the comments in the chat to list their observations or just interrupt me and do that as well. But maybe we can go to the next slide and see where that one is. As we continue down Daly, we approach Arthur Ave. I believe, is it Liquid Planet that is there now? Is that to the left right there? And then, yeah, campus is directly in front of us. And we'll sit here just for a second for people to take in all the images, and then we can move on to the next slide in 5 or 10 seconds. So now we're on Arthur Ave. We're heading to campus. We could have crossed the street. We could have crossed Arthur at the intersection with Daly. There is a marked crosswalk there. Or we could have stayed on I guess, the west side and then crossed at University Ave, which I believe we'll see that crossing in the next slide. Picture taken recently. So here we are at University Ave. So we've stayed on from a traveling perspective, we've stayed on the west side of the street and we're ready to head onto campus. There's the Lomason Center on the right on campus. some things that are maybe tough to see from this angle, and quite frankly, they might be tough to see even if you were standing there on the ground. But this intersection was intended to be designed as a raised intersection, which would slow vehicular traffic, and or at least that's the intent, while also providing less of a dip in the sidewalk for pedestrians. I think that this was one of the first ones the city had ever done, and I think that to be kind to us, there are some lessons to be learned. If we're not going to be as kind, I have some choice words for this one, but I'll leave those to you guys.
I think that's great, Ben. Just because it's concrete doesn't mean it's permanent.
Yep. So here we are. Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was just going to mention on that previous picture, something that I kind of took note of is some of the snow potentially hasn't been removed from the intersection. So that might be kind of difficult for somebody trying to navigate across Arthur there.
Great.
So now we've landed across the street, and amazingly, we're in the summer again. It's wonderful. I wish that was the case. And we're headed onto campus. The path is the historic brick, and with some concrete space in there as well. And we're going to continue east to the Grizz statue. And Emily, is this the last slide of this segment?
It is. So I think we'll take that poll here soon. Let me go ahead and pull that up.
Mark, are you ready to give your spiel about this?
Yep. So normally if we were all together as a group, I would say, let's all gather here. And by the way, if you were organizing a live audit, I'd ask you to always think about where your stopping places are, to be thoughtful to other users, right? Where can we get the group off to the side, have everybody have access, and yet be safe and not impede other pedestrians or cyclists who want to get through. Emily's kind of collected some representative images from here to remind us, as you think about this section, I'd ask you to do a 1 to 10 score. 10 would be if you think it performs well in all 4 of the aspects: variety of destinations, mix of land uses, connectivity and quality of the network, the details of site design being functional for somebody not in a car, safe and accessible for all users. And I know that's an awful lot to put in one number. It's an imperfect process, but it's a way to get people to sort of think about their experience overall for a segment. So what you'll do is, actually, Emily's going to put up a poll, and I'd like you to answer that. If we were standing in a group, I'd literally pass my hand over the group and have people shout their numbers out. My goal is that you don't be influenced by others. Put your number out there based on your perspective. There's not a right or a wrong. What we're really looking for is where it clusters. You know, is this something that's closer to a 2 or a 3, a 5 or 6, or a 9 or a 10? Again, no right or wrong. So go ahead and launch that poll if you would, Emily, if you have not yet. And you're going to put it, just pick your number. 10 is great. 1 horrible, no right or wrong answers, anything in between, sort of reflective of and try to think about all 4 of the elements, if you will. Even though that you're trying to do a 1 number score based on 4 different things, there's kind of a collective reality of that based on your experience. And kind of you're thinking this: would I encourage somebody to walk, to bike, to move through this environment without a car, or would I discourage them based on sort of the collective reality of what I saw there? So I see a good number of you, about a third have answered. Go ahead, just put a number out there. Nobody's going to judge you based on your answer. And that's in fact you as a facilitator. If you're facilitating, your job is to make sure that doesn't happen. For example, if you have somebody who's kind of in a position of authority, public works director or the mayor, I've seen this happen, and they give their number and then everybody else feels like they have to give the same number. I discourage it. And in fact, I sometimes will pass my hand across the group intentionally to keep the people of authority at the end of the scoring. I honestly will do that. I'll pass my hand over the group and I'll start with the people that aren't public officials, aren't on staff with the city, and with those folks. And when they shout their numbers out, everybody can, sort of be very frank and honest.
Mark,
okay.
one of the things that I've observed as someone who wants to take the information that we learn at a inclusive interdisciplinary walk move audit and try and put it into practice is I am always fascinated by the outliers of these numbers.
Yeah.
when there's a cluster around 6 or 7 and someone gave it a 2, I really want to know, what did that person see and what did they feel that led them to that, because I want to try and account for that in the planning and in fixing it. Similarly, if everyone's around a 4 and someone gave it a 10, maybe there's something that we're all missing and that we really need to look at differently.
Right.
You know, that can help us from an educational perspective.
That's a really good point. And I will often make sure I reach out to that person actively during the conversation. So for example, we see this kind of clustering. You say the average here might be about a 7 because you see 6, 7, 8 scores, but there are a couple of 4s, which are perfectly valid. So I might say, hey, if somebody doesn't offer, because normally here's what I do. I now would ask, let's talk about the things that kept us from giving it a 10. No one gave it a 10. So we all have agreement there are some imperfections. So if you would either throw in the chat box or, and thank you, Emily, for running that poll. That's terrific. Throw in the chat box or unmute yourself and toss it out. We're a small enough group. I think we can just do this openly. Say some things concisely, not a big long soliloquy, but put out some of your notions of what lowered your score, concrete, specific things that might have lowered your score right now, if you would.
And just state your name for the captionists so they can discern different names and voices. This is Meg. I would say that one of the things is I just couldn't see that all of the sidewalks were connected with what we would call truncated dome curb cuts. So that brought down my score.
Excellent. So that lowered your score. What else? Tell me another thing that lowered your score. And by the way, we could, if we were doing this, were we workshopping this specific area, we could be annotating this, right? Taking notes of where we saw that, right? As we walked along, or we could go back and look at that more closely now that that's been pointed out. Excellent. Give me another.
Julia, can people come off of mute?
There are some in the chat that are worth.
Oh, good. I'll read out a couple of those. Cars lining the road in the first picture. This can make it hard for cyclists during a heavy traffic time. That's right. And we worried, Mackenzie, that's a great observation. Mackenzie made that one about getting doored. If I've got to ride really close to those cars, what if one of those doors pops open? Oh, great point from Zoe about the bricks. You know, we do bricks often as an aesthetic treatment, and I understand the appeal of that. I've worked with many a public works director who acknowledges the challenges, particularly in cold weather environments. They get lifted by plows or by the freeze and thaw, and that it's perhaps better to use bricks or pavers like that as edging, maybe for ornamentation, but make sure that the main treadway, the main passageway is good concrete that's flat, level, and reliably flat and smooth. Great catch on that, Zoe. Anybody else?
One thing that would lower my score, and it's more evident in person, is cars just fly down Arthur Avenue sometimes.
Great. And that's a great example of the kind of thing that if we walked this at a certain time of day without much traffic, people might give it 6s and 7s. If you walked it when cars were going that fast, you might give it a 2 or 3. And maybe that's one of those outliers Ben was just talking about. Our friend Charles yesterday, Charles Brown, when we were doing one, pointed out, he said, what's this like at night? Does it get pretty dark? Would this be comfortable for a young woman walking alone or any young person walking alone? So somebody who has that added experience might give you one of those scores that's really worthy of taking note because they have an experience. You know, Emily, because you've used this corridor, some high speeds. Outstanding.
Hey everyone, I need to sign off and go pick up my son from daycare, but I really appreciate being a part of this, being invited. And I also, even this feedback that we've already started getting is great for me to hear as a city planner. And I look forward to a summary from Meg and Emily, if possible, in the aftermath. And I'm interested to learn more. And I also, again, want to reiterate my strong support for this tool in general, and ask that one of the things that is helpful to me is if people are asking for this tool to be used. So it's not just up to me and my colleagues to remember, but we should. But it's also, it's really helpful when members of the public, when students, when anybody in any sort of community wants to say, hey, can we walk through the community together and observe what is and isn't working? That is helpful for us. So Thank you again. And with that, I'll let you move on to segment 2.
Thanks, Ben.
Ben.
I want to make a quick point to build on Ben's point. This is actually pretty important. That's sort of an invitation. Would you come walk with us? Would you come audit an environment with us? Because it's a little less confrontational, it's not like walking into a public works director's office and saying, you guys have failed. I hate that raised intersection. You did it wrong. You're stupid. You should go fix it. You can imagine what kind of a reaction that's going to get from a director of public works or an engineering department, as opposed to, hey, I have some concerns. We have a group that would love to do a walk with you. Could you come out and do an audit with us sometime? And we could experience this together. Shared discovery, shared problem solving. Have I said it enough times? I know I'm like a broken record, but I just can't tell you how it changes the entire tenor of how some of this can be received.
I love that, Mark. This is Meg. I just want to build on it one more thing. I just started serving on the ADA committee for the University of Montana, and it flips it on its head. This is the built environment gets built through procedures that may be a bit of a black box for people. And part of what happens when you ask Ben, we follow up and say, thanks, Ben, I'm going to follow up on that invitation. What Ben's able to do is just unpack the process and become a little more obvious, like, oh, there is this whole phase of planning, and then there's this whole phase of creating alternate routes during the project. And I have a lot to say about all of that. And I didn't know that, and so, there is that shared discovery, learning what Ben's responsibilities are and where you might have opportunities to provide input. And for the ADA committee, really trying to take us from a reactive mode in how, fixing things that were done incorrectly to when there's a project or a program or a policy, how do we engage people early so that they know what the process is and where the points are in that process, so that they can really add their input. And for equity, getting the solutions in from communities who are traditionally marginalized in the planning well ahead of time, even before we set a budget for the project, is so important, or even for where the project is going to happen, how we set the priorities. That's one of the things that we've learned by working with Mark and Kathy, that they're, being at the table and being at the table often and early leads to real changes in how things get built. So I just wanted to say that we will be following up with Ben on his invitation with the ADA committee at one of our next meetings. So I'll just stop there and add my other reason for lowering scores, Mark, is that the neighborhood we just moved through is really beautifully adjacent to campus and would be a great kind of space for people of all incomes to have, a walkable, movable routine in their life of getting to campus and around campus. But those homes are so expensive. That neighborhood that we just moved through on this first segment, some of those homes are over $1 million. And it just, it's just hard to afford that same opportunity to live this really proximate, walkable, movable life to campus from our nearest neighborhood to campus. So and
I'll give an example. What we could do if we were going to the problem solving session, and I know we're not going to today, but give an example, we could think about things among the 3 Ps. Is there policy level stuff? For example, the opportunity for accessory dwelling units, or for, does the zoning even allow housing of the type we're talking about, a little more accessible in that neighborhood? Or is it very exclusive? Is that built right into policy? Has it been hardwired in? Those are really great questions. Just to keep us moving, I'm going to now turn around, because I would never not do a stop without asking, why did you not give it a 0? We saw a number of people had numbers like 7s and 8s. So could I hear some of the positives? If you could just blast them out or throw them into the chat box, just to remind ourselves that it's good to do that. By the way, in no small part, because if I have public officials, I'd like to reward them for things they're doing right too, right? Let's acknowledge success so that it can be replicated. So positives. Anybody want to unmute and throw out something you saw in this segment that raised your score? Because again, that average looked like it might have been as high as 7. Some beautiful shade through the trees. Great, Kathy. Thank you. Kathy's saying, look, shade trees. How great is that? Hot day in August literally reduces the heat island effect. Yellow zones for visibility. Thank you, Zoe. Right. So she's seeing the yellow paint zones. Sidewalks with the traffic and the, yeah, right. Existing sidewalks. And I might ask, do you like that they're set back in many places from the road, not at the curb edge, and traffic calming circles? The circles should, we hope, over time have the effect of bringing speeds down on the corridor. Really good. Any others? Yeah, the trees do. Oh, by the way, there's an interesting thing about trees, Mackenzie, and maybe you and I have talked about this. She said they create a buffer. There's some evidence that they do tend to also act to calm traffic. They narrow the visual corridor without changing the actual width of the curb. So mature trees creating even that overarching sort of canopy does tend to slow drivers down. There are a number of studies that show that. Take those trees away, speeds would probably go up several miles per hour on a corridor like this, just by virtue of that narrowing.
Hey, Mark, I want to share something about
but it's funny. I was just going to say, Karen, what would be the provocative question you would ask? But maybe you'll make an observation.
Karen and provocative questions.
So just introduce yourself to the group.
Hey. Hi, everyone. My name is Karen. I work in policy and advocacy at Lakeshore Foundation. I am a white woman, long blonde hair. I'm a manual wheelchair user, and I am zooming in as an uninvited guest from the Muncie Lenape lands, also known as New Jersey. I want to talk about the trees really quickly, and while they create such great canopies, but if you notice in the top right-hand corner, and this is something, again, a nuance that some people might miss. As a manual chair user, what do you all see in that top right-hand picture that may be something? I know Tyler talked about the snow and the curb cut. Yes, Mackenzie put in the chat. She said leaves. And what do you think leaves do to someone who is traversing a space or moving in a space? Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I'll share with you what happens to me. Obviously, I'm always looking down anyway, so I'm not really having a conversation with you because I'm trying not to fall out of my wheelchair, right? Which has happened often. This is why we're having this conversation. So these trees, the leaves on the ground, they block any type of visual that I may have, that if a root from those trees is kind of elevating the sidewalk, or there is something that is in the sidewalk that might cause me to fall or hit the bump and fall out of the chair, that's not something that I can readily see. Similarly to snow on the edge of a curb cut, when snow melts, there's a little puddle and you can't necessarily see if the curb ramp and the road is beveled. So I may fall as a result of that, and many others. So I just wanted to share that. Thanks, Mark. Excellent, Karen.
And one can imagine the difference of Karen just saying that versus being on the audit with me and illustrating that. It's dramatic, and that's one of the things she and I often talk about why we have to make the effort to be as inclusive as possible, right? Because you can imagine that learning, that, well, let's call it the teachable moment, is vastly different if it's hypothetical versus experiential. Is that fair?
I forgot something, Mark, sorry. Something that Charles Brown always brings up. One of the things that he points out is the culture, where it doesn't matter where you are and on the walk audit and move audit. He talks about, whether it's the Mandela that Ben talked about, or he talks about the statue locations, and he talks about certain art that is reflective of the community. Who created that art? Who chose that art to be there? Because it's always with a specific intention. Which community members elevated that art, and is the art appropriate? Because could that art potentially be offensive? That statue, what does it actually represent? So when we're looking at collective liberation and community engagement, those are other things that we really need to talk about and consider.
Karen, this is Meg. I really appreciate that. Even when we think about how the names in this space are what the names of these streets are. These are all our early settlers here our white settlers.
Well, I was going to say white Western European settlers, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's be explicit.
Um,
So one of the things Karen and Charles do really well, and why they continue to be my mentors, is they are really good at asking the provocative question and sort of compelling people to think about it a little, right? And that's, I think, which is so great. A successful audit does that. It gets people thinking, right? And it draws them out of their typical locked in perceptions and perspectives. Yeah.
There's just one more thing I want to add and prompt Tyler maybe. As you move into campus past the Lowenson Center, there are those bricked rectangles and strips of really level cement. One thing that I've noticed walking on campus with colleagues who use wheelchairs is that I have a usual route and I take that small strip of flat cement and walk that. But if I'm walking or I'm on campus with somebody who uses a wheelchair, they don't have that same opportunity. That whole built environment pushes somebody who needs a wider footprint, let's just use that phrase, but a wider space to move through, you're on the bricks. So we will actually go around to where the flat sidewalks are and come in on a longer route, which is off to the left there.
I was just going to say, Meg, I would always go over and parallel the Lowenson Center on the sidewalk closest to it, because that was it was a smooth concrete sidewalk rather than the brick.
Perfect. Perfect examples. Let's keep moving, just out of respect for time. I want you to see, because Emily did a lot of work pulling together 3 cool segments. And Emily, are you going to take us around campus and get your flu shot and grab a coffee? I think you're going to do some stuff here.
Yes.
Maybe visit with some friends. Say you're going to do homework, but then not sit around and play some foosball instead. You're a university student, right? That's what you guys do, right? I'm dating myself. You know what foosball is? You probably don't. Oh my God, I'm so old. Take us for a little tour.
All right. Well, yes, my name's Emily. I'm a graduate student currently at UM. And so this next segment will just be, some photos around campus. So a lot of you will probably be familiar with most of these spaces. So if you'll remember, we just passing the Lowenson Center on our right, we just passed the Grizz statue, and now we're going to go to class at Skaggs. So we're gonna go around the oval to get there. So this picture on the left is just, these were all actually taken this week, so recent pictures of the oval. So we're gonna go around, and as we're heading to Skaggs, we'll pass the Payne Family Native American Center, which are these 2 photos on the right. So again, we're just going to keep in mind the 4 elements that Mark has kind of asked us to think about as we're looking through these. All right, so we got to Skaggs from around the oval. This is right by Urey Lecture Hall, these bike racks and picnic tables. So we're leaving Skaggs now, and we decided we want to grab a coffee, which we definitely need since it's so snowy right now. So we go by the think tank. And again, we're going to start heading back to the oval so we can go about the rest of our day. The oval really is such a connection spot in the middle of campus. And so it's what I personally use for a lot of my transportation to get from class to class. Okay, so we're still going around the oval. Just so you have some context in mind, we're actually on our way to the UC. So as we're on our way to the UC, we see University Hall, which, if you're not familiar, it's the really tall building kind of opposite the Grizz statue. I couldn't even get the whole building in the photo, but it does have the large clock tower. And so you can see, again, more photos of the oval on the left, and then the middle and right photo are both of University Hall. Which, Meg, you can correct me if I'm wrong, University Hall, that's where the president's office is, correct?
Yes, that's where the president's office is.
So we're passing by the president on the way to the UC.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
No, we waved to the president. Hi.
Oh, we waved to the president, yeah. So, yes, so here we are going to the UC. This left picture is not really a sidewalk at this point. It's just kind of that worn down path that people have kind of made into a trail on the way to the UC. And then the middle picture is the main kind of entrance to the UC. And then the top picture, that's in front of the greenhouse area, that statue. So right behind that are going to be those clear see-through greenhouse buildings that are all kind of in front of the university center. This was also the day they had voting on campus, and so there are a lot, I don't know if you can see all these kind of boards in the middle picture, but there were a lot of voting boards all over campus this day. Okay, so here, this is the front entrance to the UC. So we're going to pretend we walk into the UC this way, or we move into the UC this way. And then we maybe go to the store in there, you do whatever you want in the UC, and then we're going to actually leave by the tennis courts. So that's the picture on the right. If we are moving down this sidewalk, the tennis courts are on our left, they're in that gated area. I unfortunately am not as good at Ben as knowing my north, south, east, and west, so you'll have to suffer through my left and rights here. All right, so we passed by the tennis courts, and we're gonna go to the gym in the Adams Center area. So the picture on the left, you can see straight ahead is where, if you wanna go work out, that's the gym you would go to. And the Adams Center is on the right of that picture. It's the main entrance to the Adams Center is this photo on the right. So you can see there were quite a bit of people out and about this day. They were doing voting in the Adams Center, so there were quite a lot of people around as we were taking photos. All right, so we are done at the gym and we decide we need to go to Curry, get a flu shot, hopefully not get a COVID test, but I guess if you need one, hopefully it's negative. So that's what we're going to do now. So here's just a couple of the sidewalks that you would take on the way from the Adams Center to Curry. So you encounter this one on the left first. You can actually see straight ahead, that is where the UM bus line stops for on campus. And then we would get to this sidewalk on the right, and straight ahead is the Curry Health Center. So we're almost to Curry. Okay, so we get to Curry, and this brick wall on the left is one of the first things you see. So you can see it tells you that you can use the main entry for the accessible entrance. And if we walk up probably 20 feet or so, then this is the main entrance. You can see in the photo right now, they are doing some kind of pickup things for COVID reasons. So there are a few boards like that around that have different COVID regulations and or services they're offering due to COVID. All right, so we're done at Curry and we're going to leave. We are trying to cross the street on the left one to get over to the sidewalk that is right in front of the Gallagher Business Building. So that is the sidewalk that then leads to the Hello Walk, which is what we call these photos on the right. If some of you are unfamiliar, basically towards the beginning of the semester, they invite students and I believe faculty and staff as well out to come write hello or some kind of greeting. A lot of people will do it either in their native language or, you know, I think there's some fun ones. You can see the one at the top says, "What's cooking? Good looking." So people just write fun little kind of nice ways to say hello. And the tradition is that if you pass someone on the hello walk, you're supposed to greet them and not just ignore them. So I think that that is the end of our Around Campus Day. We're done for the day.
Well, I am exhausted, quite frankly. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And God, did the president chat our ear off when we stopped over there. But all right, so this is great. Think about, there was a lot there. And I will say this, by the way, that sometimes we will make segments shorter with the goal of having a section be somewhat consistent. That is, make a break every time there's a dramatic change in the conditions so that we can focus. You don't have to do that, but as you think about if you're going to be facilitating an audit like this, there might be times when you want to do that, do a short segment because it's so unique, right? It's different than what's before it or after it. That said, this gives you a good sense, a kind of a general sense of the campus. So let's go ahead and launch that poll, Emily, if we could. And I'll ask you to score again this one, and you're thinking about, again, mix of land uses and destinations, continuity and quality of the network, the details of site design, does it reward you or punish you for being outside of your car, safety and access for all possible users. So you give it a 10 if it's got all of those things in spades, it's fantastic, and you'd give it a 0 if it had none. And there's no right or wrong answers, it's just, what's your experience of that? And if you're somebody who travels there, obviously you can add that knowledge. And of course, that's the great benefit of having people in the community participate when we're doing this. They bring all of the knowledge of the other times they walk there, when I walk there in different seasons, when I walk there when it's dark or light, when I walk there alone versus with a group. So good, this is great. Keep answering. I've only got 10. We need more answers.
So this is Kate. Can I just make a comment quickly? I am associate legal counsel here at the university, and I just wanted to add, because we didn't see it when we went by the oval, but this past summer, you know, the cross sections of the oval were always brick, and this past summer we changed that to stamped concrete in order to make it more accessible.
So it's got that the brick look kind of with. But it's not actual bricks that can lift up, at least. Okay.
Right.
And it's colored, like a brick color?
Yes.
Great, Kate, thank you. And thanks for joining, by the way. So I see a lot, it looks like a lot of you have answered, but still if you haven't, please don't hesitate. If you're there, you know, I mean, don't feel like, oh, my opinion's not valid. Of course it is, if you'd like. We want everybody to answer. All right, good. So here's this one. We're all over. I don't want to say all over the place, but there's a lot of breadth. We have as low as a 2 and as high as an 8. And I don't see, you know, often you'll get sort of a bell curve, like a lump in the middle of that, but we're sort of evenly distributed across that spectrum. So good. So that means we should have seen a lot at both ends of the spectrum. Let's start again with potential negatives. So does everybody see this on the scoring from 2 to 8 with a couple of votes for everything from as high as 8 to as low as a 4? Okay, so having said that, I'm going to close that poll out of the way just so you can reference these photos, comments in the box, or your observations. Let's first talk about negatives. I like to do those first so we can always end on positive. So what were things that lowered your score? Specific things. Either write in the chat or go ahead and shoot it off. I think there's a few enough of us. If you unmute, just toss it out.
Oh, this is Kate again. I would say most of the sort of snow removal looked pretty good, and I know our grounds crew tries hard in this, and we have a couple new people, so they're going to be trained because what co-chair of the ADA committee spoke with the grounds crew. But you know, and I have not reviewed what their accessible routes are that they shovel, but yeah, clearly the path to the coffee shop could have been problematic.
Right, that's right. There were a couple of spots. In this, I've got to go back to what Karen just taught me. When I've got the leaves like this combined with sort of a snow or ice that's sort of, you know, holding them down, man, my visibility of what's sort of underneath that really problematic. So that's a very illuminating. And it's a reminder that there may be an issue seasonally around leaf removal before you get to the snow season, right? So that can't happen. So that's an interesting, and that's new to me. Could not see the accessible entrance to the UC. That's right. Okay, I wondered about that as well. The snow in front of the coffee shop. We just, yep, Kate said that as well. And some of the other sidewalks. And am I right that the President's Building, the accessible entrance, whatever that building was called, and I apologize, you know, you had to go around to the north entrance, but at least we were directed there, which is better than not having one. But at the UC, was it obvious where the accessible entrance was? Because we saw all those steps going up in, Emily. Who from the campus can tell us about that?
The entrance, are you able to see my mouse?
Yep.
Can y'all see it? So the accessible entrances are to the left and right of the stairwell. They are somewhat, in my opinion, somewhat hard to see. Also, though, photo-wise, just hard to get a great photo where you are able to see those entrances.
Got it. That's helpful. Kathy points out that there were no truncated domes. I definitely note detectable warnings on some of those sidewalk crossings of on the last stretch toward the health center. And oh, the trash can. So if we can't get to things like a trash can because it's in snow or icy areas, that means I'm walking around with my empty coffee cup indefinitely. Do I have to just carry it in my lap or, you know, carry it in my hand until I get to that? So we want to make sure even simple attributes, pieces of street furnishing are, we can do our clearing to get to those as necessary. Good point about that.
I hope it's okay, Mark, I'm gonna share, if Chris were here, we've had a great fortune of being on many of these with Chris, is some of his principles from orientation mobility about how the environment is predictable for people who are blind and low vision is I think one of the principles is these movable parts, these sandwich boards, that if that can always be in a certain zone, that is so much better for people who are blind and low vision. And maybe you can help expand on that. And then the other part is just when there's opportunities to design on the perpendicular.
Right,
so,
on axes. So Chris teaches us taught me two things, at least that align perfectly with yours. If you can give me orthogonal axes, then I can orient to those. So if I know that I'm on you know, sort of a north, south, east, west axis, and that's going to be clear. And if we do have sandwich boards, they won't ever get placed in that, right? They're placed in so we often talk about sidewalks having a building zone, a travel zone, and a furnishing zone. Furnishings might have planters, it might have a bike rack, it might have the sandwich board. But if I can reliably know that the through zone isn't going to have that, then I can move along that axis much more safely and effectively. And I think Kathy, made the same point. So thank you for that.
Mark, this is Tyler.
Tyler, hey Tyler.
I wanted to point out two different entrances. The one being that I think it's the west entrance on the University Center, where there's the stairs going up and then the little, like almost hallway going down into the UC there. The width of those little hallways is about the width of a power chair. So in order to get down those, you about have to direct traffic on both ends because there's nobody's getting around either direction. So that was always a difficult transition for me there.
Great observation. That's another one of those things that have you not experienced it, you might not even pick it up. So thanks, good.
And it's quite a long corridor to kind of hold people. Yeah, boy, it makes me think of when Luke Skywalker has to go down that canyon and drop Tyler, the way you were describing that.
or crossing a long covered bridge in Vermont where, you know, the car at the other end's got to know you're coming. Otherwise, two people in the middle of this hallway, Tyler, and now are you going to go backwards, right? Do you have to actually back out? So it's a great example. Really good heads up on that.
Then
what else? You had another. Yeah.
The other one I noted was the health center. I know we all saw the sandwich board there, and then the accessible entrance is clearly labeled, but the actual button for the auto door opener is on the door itself. And it's tough to see which door would open, but either way, you're going to get hit by that door when you hit the button. So, you know, it doesn't matter. You almost have to hit the button and then try to get out of the way really fast or something. I'm not sure.
Got it.
And
great.
Tyler, this is a split level design building. Can you just unpack for people a little bit about when we have split level design in buildings? So
yeah,
that
that's, well, you're kind of dropping efficiency a bit there because, you're either going to have to add, like you come into a split level and usually you have like a little, I don't know what you want to call it, but yeah, you're going to have to go either up or down. So you're going to have an elevator someplace in there in order to get from level to where you could possibly design it an entrance to where you could access both without having to deal with added cost and then added space constraints.
Great. I mean, it's almost another wayfinding conundrum too, right, Tyler? I mean, it's another sort of, okay, which level am I on? Where's the stuff I got to get to? How do I access that, right? It just compounds all of that. Mackenzie makes a point in the comment, going back to Karen's observation around the art at the middle of the circle and in general, who's responsible and does that enhance? Is that then, kind of collectively decided upon? Let's do some positives, and I'm not trying to cut short, it's just to kind of, because we're learning a process. This is more about a process than anything. So could we throw out any positives? And I'm going to do one that sort of just tells you what you get when you have a wonky engineer along. And one of the crossings of a driveway at the end, I noticed that the sidewalk, it looked like the sidewalk was properly designed. That is, the driveway went down, then it leveled for the crosswalk, then it went down again, as opposed to making the sidewalk across the driveway be at the angle of the drive. All of the change in elevation, the car had to make it on either the ramp or the upper part of the driveway. It's a little thing, but it can be a very big thing. More importantly, from an engineering standpoint, it requires the engineer to designate that. If they don't call that out in their drawings and so on, it just doesn't happen. What you end up with is, here's the driveway ramp and the sidewalk or the crossway, the pathway across is at the angle of the ramp, which is not best practice. It's not in the manuals, but it often gets overlooked. And I was pleased to see that on one. It would have raised my score a little bit. And I might call it out, by the way, to the benefit of the facilities or the engineering person, whoever's responsible for it, because if we've been beating them up because they failed on this and this and this, I want to give them credit for something they've done well, because I want them to keep doing it. I want them to make that standard practice, right? That's a good design, so do that. So anyway, I throw that out as one of the things that raised my score. Anybody else have another positive things that raised your score through here? Remember all my elements.
I think, sorry. I think while there were a few instances of snow blocking pathways, overall, with the amount of land that had to be, I guess, uncovered, I think relatively did okay with snow removal.
Or let's acknowledge at least the areas where it was done well. Was that Julia? Yeah.
Yes, that was Julia, sorry.
Thanks. No, great. Yeah, thank you. Good observation and another example of a positive to acknowledge. Really good.
Yeah, this is Emily. From my own perspective, I love that certain areas of campus really give a place for Native culture to shine. Specifically, the Payne Family Center has some really nice touches. I think the Hello Walk can be nice. I know I personally went and wrote hello in my tribe's native tongue, and I know a lot of people do that. You can see an example here of someone writing hello in their native language, and so I think that's a really cool touch, because I do think UM has a lot of cultures that come together.
Terrific. That's a great example. Anybody else? Anybody want to throw anything else out there?
Well, Mark, it's Karen. Going along with what Emily just shared about the Hello Walk, I want to just point out, what if you're blind? Huh? There's no audible anything to share with someone who has a visual impairment and who would not be able to see that, and to also participate in that welcoming space. While I think that is great, there's nothing to share that with someone who has a visual impairment and who's blind. The other thing is, my goodness, what a beautiful view on that lower left, that lower left walkway, and the sidewalk area is very wide, which is nice. The other thing I wanted to point out, Tyler shared that that alcove on the side of that building is very narrow. From a gender perspective and a disabilities perspective, at night or any time really when I would be alone, that would be a scare. If I have any type of trauma background, that would be a very scary place for me to be, because you are literally trapped in that particular area, right? With those walls. And I've encountered that in many different places. Like, as a matter of fact, in Birmingham, our city hall is designed that way. So after 5 o'clock, if you have a meeting with a certain committee, you have to go through a certain entrance, and I refuse to go through the entrance because, very specifically, because of that reason. Also, I agree, the snow clearing as well, but even if you think about when you say, oh, it was reasonably well done, well, reasonably is for someone with a disability not good enough. And on the lower right-hand picture, while I saw lots of great accessible parking, which is wonderful, I'm very curious to see how adhered to the parking people are, because very often when it's like so close to an athletic building or a theater building, whatever that building is, you know, a lot of people just drive up, want to pop right in, and I'll be right out, and they'll use that space. Right? And
it's just gonna be a minute phenomena, right, Karen?
Yeah, oh,
it's gonna be a minute. I'm just gonna be a minute.
And lastly, I want to share that anytime, and I know a lot of these buildings are older buildings, but I want to encourage anyone who's in planning or design, stop with the stairs, because the stairs are so othering. Everyone can get up a ramp, everyone can get up a beveled access, right? Like, what are the purpose of stairs? Let's talk about that, because usually they're for concrete. It jacks up the price of construction and it brings you to a different level. When there's opportunities to build that without stairs in a universally designed way, everyone can access a front entrance. So often people with disabilities are relegated to the back of the building, the side of the building. The accessible entrance is over here when you've just moved with all of your friends. And now they're like, oh, we'll meet you inside. And then 10 minutes later, while you go around the building to the other side, you might, make it to class on time or whatever that equation is. It is really othering when you have to use the side entrance or a different entrance. And it doesn't give you a sense of belonging.
Excellent. In the comments, I see Julia pointed out lots of bike parking here near the center, University Center. So obviously not cleared, and I don't know whether you have and it's different, cities are different about this. There is a culture of cycling growing in snow cities now, I know, so that it might be important to do that if there were the opportunity for cyclists to use, if there were likelihood that there are people cycling through all seasons, which is happening in some parts of the country, then you would want those to be somewhat cleared.
One
all right,
thing,
good.
Quickly, that would raise my score during like these COVID times is that the Curry Health Center is offering pickup services.
Yeah.
Making people more comfortable if you really are not, if you're not comfortable with that, going into the building kind of interaction.
Curbside pickup, good.
Oh, hey, Mark, on that bottom right-hand slide, that shows really well, like when you have a downslope right there at that ramp area, see where that water pools?
Yes.
And, at night, I'm sure in Montana, that water freezes. So it's not necessarily dangerous for someone who's a chair user or someone who is visually impaired or blind. Anyone who's walking across that can slip and fall.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yep. That's a common problem and a great one to pick up. Good. Shall we look at the final segment? I want to make sure you don't not see these great images that Emily took the time to collect. So let's do the final. Yeah.
I just want to prompt Tyler, since you were a student on campus, are there things that have happened that would raise your score from when you were a student to now? Are there things you would really point to?
Yeah, I think it was when I was going to school there, or shortly after they widened the sidewalk going down to the down to the gym area. That was going from there, it goes from the oval all the way down. And I know that really, it helped. Like it just increased efficiency between all the classes and things. And then, which I haven't seen it yet, but Kate brought up that the cross in the middle of the oval is now not brick. And that because that was just another thing that I avoided, but I would say that's a great improvement. But yeah, that's all I can think of right now. I know they were doing a lot of work while I was there that was just increasing access. And I think, was it Ben brought up goat trails or whatnot, where you just see there's like worn paths in the grass. I know a lot of those were getting turned to sidewalks, and I think just to improve efficiency across campus. So.
That's great. This is Meg. I've been thinking about some of those beautiful natural spaces that were part of the Payne Center's design, and just some opportunities maybe for them to be a little more available to people who are wheelchair users or who just need a little more of a stable surface. There's different natural ways of doing that, and it's really soft ground and loose surfacing. So so a plus, but maybe some room to improve.
Good. Are we good to move on to segment 3? Take us home. We're now going to walk back, head back through. We're leaving campus. That's right. Back to to the villages. Right. Good.
Yes. And so Tyler and I talked about this. This is a route that he and I are both pretty familiar with. This is the greenway that the city of Missoula is working on that Ben mentioned at the beginning. So we're going to be moving south from campus along Maurice. So that follows the mountain, Mount Sentinel, the foot of the mountain. And we're going to go past some of the housing on the left, the university housing on Maurice. And then we're going to take a right on to South Avenue all the way to Higgins, again with more university housing on the left. And then there's actually 2 routes you can kind of take up towards the Lewis and Clark housing, which is the furthest south university housing complex that we have. There's one that takes you kind of back behind the women's soccer field and then up and through to Lewis and Clark villages. Is a little more scenic pathway. It's a little more connected to the playing fields that are back there. There's also the women's softball field now and the rugby field, as well as some intramural playing fields. There's also opportunities to better connect to some of the other university housing complexes on that route. The second option that you can take is to go all the way to Higgins and then follow the wide sidewalks up. So here we are still on campus, and we're headed out on our sidewalks past continuing education, and then past biological sciences. And we're moving from campus out into the community. So there's some different routes that people can take. There's sidewalks on both sides of the exit from the parking lot. On the right on this photo is the bus stop. Just give people a chance to absorb that. And then we're connecting to another section of housing that surrounds our campus on this street, Maurice. And this is that greenway. So this is the first section you're going to encounter on Maurice Avenue. It's a relatively residential street. You'll see a route that we're going on mostly through neighborhoods, but there's going to be a couple spots where you can get something to eat, and we'll start to see a little bit more once we get to Higgins. Mount Sentinel's on the left of this photo. To the right, on the right side of the photo, a couple blocks up is Arthur Avenue. Okay. And this is a photo I took today after talking with Ben. On the left is some of the university housing, and on the right is private housing. And we've got on-street parking. There's snow still on the streets. I think we're all hoping that we'll have a return to some warmer temperatures. And in the far distance is one of those traffic calming circles. And you actually, thanks Emily, did such a great job with these photos and organizing this whole slideshow. If you zoom in, as Emily has done here, the traffic calming circle is a little more apparent. It is temporary. And this photo is, I took it to highlight how the traffic calming really pushes cars to wait their turn in this kind of pinch point. The bicyclist gets to go first and not have to kind of try and shrink up. So the car is following the cyclist in this photo around the traffic calming circle. Now we're connecting all the way to south. There's a recreation trail at the end of that photo that takes us up onto Mount Sentinel. Here's another look at Maurice from our Google satellite images. There's two sidewalks on both sides. Both sides of the street have a sidewalk. There's alleys and driveways. We're headed out south on Maurice in this picture. So just another image of that. Some more images of Maurice Avenue from our Google satellite. And again, just remembering that these images are not necessarily up to date. So going past the university housing in the upper right-hand corner photo, there's on-street slant parking on one side and then more traditional curbside parking on the other side in the upper right-hand corner photo. And then on the bigger photo on the left corner, we see some more residential housing, more private residential housing and curbside parking. Great, next. Just this is that view to the recreation trail. If we were to go past the large kiosk on the left, you could get up on the mountain and onto some of the trails that way. There's a fire road, so it's got some wide, hard surfacing for some stretch of that. And then there's a community center looking straight ahead in this photo where the parking lot is. And then we're going to turn right on south here. Now we're headed on South Avenue West. And this is a picture from today, two photos from today. So the one on the left is looking straight ahead on South Avenue. And if I was just to turn to the left, we end up with a photo on the right. And that sign says, if it was a better photo, it would say Iron Grizz. And that fenced area is a garden that produces things that are sold at the Iron Grizz, which is that little restaurant adjacent to the University of Montana golf course. And it's a kind of a quaint little neighborhood restaurant and bar. This is the second, this is one of the routes that you can take from South Avenue, past and through the playing fields, coming straight up into a parking lot that's circumvented with a sidewalk that will connect us up to the Lewis and Clark villages that are viewed on the right-hand photo, just behind where we have our bus depot, basically. And there's a lot of different things located in that bus depot, but I want to go back to the left-hand side and just note that there's accessible, this is a parking area, as well as the sidewalks going up and around, which are harder to see, but they are connected to that asphalt path that will connect you all the way down to South Avenue. And if you come up through the parking lot and follow the sidewalk around, now you're in the end destination for one of our park and ride routes to campus. So people can park their cars here and take the bus in from this station. There's also other city buses that go right by on Higgins Street, just to the right of that building. There's things that you can't quite see, but there's an ATM machine located here in a little alcove, and there's a couple bike racks on the right there. And there's also a little red hole where you can do some bike maintenance. I don't think that's very viewable in this, but it's all right there. And then this is the route that if we were to take South Avenue all the way to Higgins, now we're in kind of a mixed use area where we've got some businesses, a gas station notably in view, and I think the building is kind of brown and tan. It's been a lot of different things. I'm not sure what it is right now. I think it's a chiropractic office, and across the street is a comic book store. There's a couple restaurants behind the gas station. And we would just be turning left here to head back to that bus stop that we were at before at Lewis and Clark Villages. So this is another way home that follows Higgins Avenue. And on the left would be the women's soccer field. On the right is a private neighborhood. And then if we follow that route all the way up, we'd be back at that parking lot with the end point for the park and ride and the Lewis and Clark housing on the left. And this photo is showing us that end destination. So that housing was built in the last 20 years. It used to be open space, and now it provides more housing. So that's on the left, and straight ahead are the South Hills. And great, thanks, Emily. Ready for the next slide. And then this is a closer look at the Lewis and Clark Village. Lots of parking and different units, different sidewalks into the Lewis and Clark Villages and running along and connecting to other sidewalks in the area. And that's that long walk home. 2 miles, not bad. I tend to bike it, but every once in a while I'm on that park and ride bus. So Tyler, would you add anything to that brief but spectacular description of our route?
No, that was a great route home.
So should we have people score those? Do you want to do the poll one more time, guys?
Let's do it.
Okay, good. So if you don't mind, Emily, go ahead and launch the poll for that segment, those segments, really. And now I know it's even worse because I'm making you compare two. Pick the one you liked better. And we can even talk about what you liked better about the one you liked, if you could. Like, which route would you choose? And it might be determined by whether you're on a bike or not, for example, right? Maybe that would change what your perception is. So go ahead, a few of you have voted. Just throw a number in there, 1 to 10. Remember, 10 great, 1 bad, mix of land uses, connectivity of the network, details of site design, safety and access for all users. By the way, on the last one, we did not say this. One of the things that would have raised my score while you're voting right now, I forgot to point out that campus does have an awful lot of different land uses in close proximity. Housing, right? We went to a coffee shop, we went to academic buildings, we went to community services, health services, a fitness facility, the gym. My only point is there that campuses tend to have that benefit, right? They are by definition sort of what a downtown or a Main Street district used to have, which is lots of different land uses in proximity. And it means a lot can be done without getting in a car. So I think it's worthy of noting that would have added a point to my score because I like that range of available land uses. All right, no, a lot of people aren't voting. Are you tired? You finished? You're done with this? It's okay.
I will say this is the hard part to convert into the virtual. When we're out in the space doing it together, you can't shut people up by this point, you know. This is, and that's the part I think that, you know, you and I have been talking about. There is something to moving through space together that is invigorating and additive to this process. And it's hard to recreate. It's hard to recreate in this space.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You got oxygen flowing, right? If you're physically moving, you've got oxygen flowing to your brain. There's a lot going on. Hey, Karen, can I say what made me laugh? If Meg thought I was laughing at her, I didn't mean to, because when Meg showed the roundabout, the mini circle with the cyclist, she said, in Montana, the bicycle will go first. In New Jersey, I'm not convinced. I thought that was it. I just could hear Karen saying it in her voice in it. But that's true. There's something about local culture and norms and training and possibly even enforcement, right? There are a whole host of things that might influence that reality that could be very dramatically different in different parts of the country, different cities.
Julia is reminding us too that the hosts can't vote, so don't feel bad too much, Mark.
No. This is good. So
I loved Karen's observation, because when I was sitting there and watching this, I was like, oh, this will be great. And you could see this moment of, was the car going to go first? And in this case, we had a pretty, like, the cyclist who is very experienced and going to do the thing that they're supposed to do, take their lane.
Be a vehicle,
really, you know,
right? Yep. Go right into the flow, which might be different if you had a less experienced or nervous cyclist, to your point. Yeah, it's great. All right, so here's we're seeing, I'm going to just say on average lower scores, right? We're only 1 to 6. So let's talk about some of those negatives. What are things that are dragging our number down for this segment? Go ahead and either in the box or toss that out.
I noticed that on campus, right in the beginning, was a crosswalk that a car was pulled through so that the crosswalk was blocking. And I think that happens a lot when turning on Arthur from campus, because you can't, there's like bus stops and things and signs and bushes and trees, so you can't see the road. So people have to go forward into the crosswalk area.
So there's got to be a failure of design there too, because if the sight lines are bad enough that the driver feels they have to pull forward and break the law, right? Stop in the crosswalk. They're doing that to see around. Because it's funny enough, I was going to give a positive to that transit shelter. I was saying, glad to see a transit shelter, right? Acknowledging the transit user as a valued user of the system. We want to take care of them in a cold weather environment. So that's a positive, but not if it changes sight lines such that the cars are now pulling through the crosswalk. Great get on that, Julia. And that was in the image by chance, right? You happen to catch it.
Yeah, and I've experienced that for sure driving on campus before.
So you're saying that's representative. That's not an irrepresentative phenomena. Good. What else?
I'll just say, for me as a woman, I get my money out of that ATM. It's my bank. It's right there. But it's all boxed in a little alcove, this kind of brick walled alcove. So you have to go in there, and now you're getting money. And I won't do it depending on the time of day. And I know we're in Missoula, but it just, I feel a little, with my back to everything up against the ATM, like, well, I feel a little nervous.
Yeah, good. Great observation. Other things.
I was going to bring up all the lack of curb cuts on Maurice. And then where there were curb cuts, a lot of them were like the corner cut with the storm drain right at the bottom. And that just turns into like a big pothole pretty much, and you're coming off of a ramp to begin with. So you're leaned forward in your chair or bike even, whatever it might be, skateboard.
Pushing a stroller, maybe even, Tyler?
Stroller, yeah. And then so you're, then you're trying to bomb through that thing and come out the other side, not forward. But then also I noticed it on some of the intersections where there were curb cuts, they did not line up with cuts on the opposite side of the road. So for a visual impairment, trying to like get that line and orient yourself on the other side of the road is going to be really difficult, I would say.
Good get. And that's one of those lessons we were talking about before. Chris reminded us, if you can be orthogonal, if things can be perpendicular, come off, if the ramp directs me, if I'm at 90 degrees, then I know where I'm going to land on the other side. That's where I want to land on the other side. Excellent. Good.
Something else too that I wanted to mention I can't remember, the picture's not on this, but when Meg was talking about the parking lot over by the Lewis and Clark, the student apartments, and there's that road that goes down, or that trail that goes down between there's the softball field and soccer fields. So there's a curb cut that comes out of that parking lot that before it used to go, the curb cut went onto a sidewalk that went straight. If you kept going straight, you went down a dirt embankment. And that was, even, I knew it was there. I drove that route a lot, and it was difficult at times to make sure that I made that corner, because if you didn't, you were tumbling down a hill. And but I noticed, and this is a positive, that there's now a railing there. And so then you're more directed towards taking the ramp down, or the trail where it's intended.
So a good example of remediation having fixed or at least to some degree repaired the error there.
Yeah.
Good, thanks. Good example. Can I just capture what Tom just put in a great one? He just said, one challenge of navigating around in an environment like this is unless you're familiar with an area, Karen made this point so eloquently yesterday on the call we were on, you can find yourself blocked by an area, by a barrier, and you would literally have to return the way you came to find another route. You could get all the way through a route to a blockage. So Tom, that's a great point. And it's really important for folks that don't have that lived experience to be reminded of that, because they've never had to do oh my goodness, I'm going to literally retrace my steps substantially. Karen, maybe you want to add to this. Oh, you just unmuted.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, I mean, it's just so incredibly frustrating when you don't know, just like Tom said. I mean, when you are going the entire route and all of a sudden there's a barrier and you have to go back the way that you came, and you think about just from not even from a physical perspective, like what a head trip that is. You've had a long day and you just want to get to where you're going, whether that's home, your hotel, or whatever that looks like. And now, and you're with people, and now you have to go all the way back, and it's just so exhausting. It's exhausting. And I also wanted to share what Tyler talked about on that lower left picture. You can see it. There's only a curb cut that goes into the middle of the street on one side, and there is no curb cut on the other side, on the right-hand side. So you're always relegated to one side of the road. You have to take the long way, or you have to find someone's driveway to go up. So what would take someone who does not have a disability a minute just to cross the street, it might take you blocks to get to where you need to go. And the other thing, Tyler also talked about that with the ramps, and his was going to the dirt road situation. What I noticed in the housing area, those curb cuts go directly into the line or the pathway of where cars are exiting. So they're not necessarily even aware that there is a flow of a sidewalk going into the actual road where a car would drive to exit the apartment complex or that complex area. It's not on the screen over here, so you can't see it. And also, where is it? The bike lane. Whew, I am a fan of enclosed bike lanes, like right where you see the lettering for the south. I think that's what it says. Sorry, I can't really see it very well. That is very close in proximity, and I'm sure it's appropriate for what the law is, but it is very close in proximity to a cyclist. And if that road doesn't have implemented traffic calming, you might get cars that are just flying down that road, and that's really frightening. And also, it's really close to the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm. I had that same reaction, Karen. It's funny, I was thinking the same thing. If South Street doesn't have, or Ave doesn't have traffic calming, that's a pretty tight design. And on the right side, as I look at the top left picture, or on the lower right picture, it looks to me like there's a parking lane, bike lane, than the travel lane, meaning if there are cars parked there, you could get doored. Notably, there are no cars parked there. So my inner engineer brain starts to say, is that needed parking? Is it used sometimes, not others? It's what, could that be reallocated space? Could we do some things to buffer those bicycle lanes, get a little separation? Just as Karen was describing, she said, what about a buffer strip of a foot or so? So you had travel lane, buffer strip, then bicycle lane. Because the one nice thing that the bicycle lane does do is move the travel lane away from the sidewalk in that top left picture, right? Or in the bottom right one, right? So you've got a sidewalk, but if you have a bicycle lane there, then you're pushing the motor vehicle traffic at least some distance away from that sidewalk. How better still if there was another foot of buffering between the bike lane and the travel lane. So communities are looking at roads like this and asking, where do we need the parking? Does it need to be on street right here? Could we reallocate some of that space to buffer the bicyclists? It's a great example.
Also, along those lines, Mark, that top right-hand picture, I forgot to mention this, that, and by the way, Emily, great job on all these pictures, and Meg, and Tyler, it's really, really great. The top right-hand corner picture where it has that dual colored building you're talking about, oh my God, that's like a near-death experience for me, because there's no change where the sidewalk is. Is there even one? There's the driveway that's right where, see where the rear of that car is. Like can you move on that area? And then there's the accessible parking spot. And if someone's backing up, can they see you? If you're moving on that side of the road, that's just that's a hot mess right there.
Thanks, you guys. I do want to end on a high note. This is Meg. First, I'm going to say one thing that is really positive about some of the things that I saw that I just have a history of. And then I want to transition to Tom Seekins, who I have been lucky enough to work with for many years on participatory approach to how we promote health with people with disabilities, and really how we follow as researchers with tools the priorities that the disability community sets. And Tom is a distinguished alumni of the University of Montana. And I'm going to ask you, Tom, to wrap up. But let me first just say, when we did our safe and accessible routes to schools evaluation checklist with Travis Hoffman and other accessibility ambassadors, Centers for Independent Living experts from around the state that we brought to Missoula, one of the things that we learned early on, and Emily has been doing these assessments even in virtual by being on the phone with some of our ambassadors and going and looking about just around the schools and how people could even just do an active lesson plan and walk with students around the schools, that alleys intersect so many continuous, beautifully built sidewalks with gravel and a change in level, that even though there's this huge investment in the sidewalk, we were often in the street. And so we brought those findings back to the city, and in addition to having really a proactive plan, every time they're out there building, they're following PROAG and putting in the curb cuts, they're also out there and leveling the transition from the sidewalk through the alley to the other side of the sidewalk. So I saw some of those happening, and more needs to be addressed. But I just wanted to end on that high note, that we would not have seen that. We would not have planned for that if we hadn't been out there with our colleagues who have a different experience with the environment. I'm just gonna end there. And Mark, any final comments?
Only what a privilege it is to be a part of this extended team that's now becoming a national team. That's what I really like about this. I feel like you guys have done a beautiful job of really starting this work, but connected a kind of a web across the country. And I invite everybody to continue teaching me and teaching as many other people as possible what we're learning every time we do one of these. It's just a treat and a privilege.
Great. I want to extend my thanks to you and to Karen for zooming in with us, Kathy Kostakis, who was here with us from Bozeman, my incredible students who I get to work with and learn with, Emily Hicks, Elizabeth Peden, Hannah Meshashaw, who couldn't be here, who have really helped to plan these types of events, and to our Centers for Independent Living. Tyler, thank you for showing up and really adding that perspective today. And I want to thank Ben. He had to drop off, and Travis for all the help he did to plan. And then I have my Department of Public Health and Human Services partners who are really a backbone for us to build out these opportunities within the chronic disease prevention and health promotion plan that the state is responsible for. Mackenzie Jones, who's in Helena, and Heather Welch, who is, we work very closely together in state initiatives across chronic disease health promotion areas. And we didn't have a chance to delve into it today, but that's our lens. People with disabilities experience health disparities like other marginalized communities. I will say they're often left out as a group in the discussion of health equity. We often don't recognize then all of these barriers that really put people with disabilities in the car or keep them in their homes and isolate them as compared to other people in the community. And the solutions that the disability community has that could be built in to make our environment better are often overlooked by just excluding them from the groups that are leading on health equity. You know, not saying that their data are a part of the report or that their organizations are a part of the essential partners to have at the table for these conversations. So Heather, Mackenzie, and I try and center that as much as we can, and we appreciate all the support from people who participated today to help us with that. Okay, with all that said, Tom, would you mind just taking us home in terms of, you know, how do we really think about this and maybe some action steps?
Sure, thanks. So my name is Tom Seekins. I'm a retired professor from the University of Montana in psychology. A few years back, several students and I tried to develop some procedures for making direct observations of accessibility in communities. And we conducted a number of those observations in purposely selected areas in cities and towns around the country. In the process, we found ourselves coming up with a set of terms and concepts that really helped us describe what we were seeing and help us explain how it might be useful. And Meg thought a couple of terms might be useful from that work for other people. And they include the ideas and concepts of access deserts, access islands, and access barrens. So for example, first, like a desert where you can move about, but there's nothing to go and see there. An access desert is a place with good accessibility that you can move around, but there's nothing to do, or the things that are available to do are in themselves inaccessible. An access island, like an island in the middle of an ocean, involves an area in which you can move about easily and get into places, but it's isolated by barriers on all sides. Finally, an access barren is essentially the opposite of an access island, that is an area with little pathway accessibility and little building access, surrounded by areas of relatively good access. These three terms really helped us be able to describe neighborhoods in larger cities and the downtown areas in smaller towns. One of the things that we found in the observations we did was that smaller towns, older communities, were less well developed and very, very much less accessible compared to metropolitan areas that had access to larger amounts of funding and more funding streams, that had a basic access floor that they reached that was about 80% of accessibility levels that would be expected in a perfect setting. So those terms may be of interest and use to some of you. There's other terms, and Meg, I'll leave it at that. And if people are interested, happy to talk more about it later.
Great. I'm just seeing Mackenzie said that all the learning says that the solutions are broadly beneficial. So many people will benefit from such designs. And her comment, I think, to your terms, Tom, was that public health folks should be able to understand and use these terms with some ease as they have, when it's bumping up, it's hard for me, as they have some parallel to nutrition research, identifying food deserts and food oases. Not perfect correlates, but it seems appropriate. And Karen saying, thanks, Tom, I love the language, this is really beneficial. Mackenzie was sharing that's Mark's comment too. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate this in terms of next steps. So just as an example from the ADA committee, you know, there are great examples. This is how, you know, we create broad systems change. Sometimes we have some demonstration areas or projects that we really try and highlight, and then we start to do the hard work of how do we change our policy and systems to build out these good solutions everywhere, and particularly with marginalized community representatives at the table, so that we're not continuing to overlook them in opportunities to build out things better. So anyway, I'm just going to stop there. And Karen Korb, you were just going to reflect on Tom's terms, and also maybe even with your experience doing these kinds of walks at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and elsewhere. Just any final remarks for us?
Yeah, thank you, Meg. I wanted to say thank you to everyone. Tom, thank you so much for that language, that vernacular. I mean, it's very, sometimes so unique to the spaces that we operate in. And there's another term that I want to bring forward from Mia Mingus, who's an incredible activist, advocate with a disability and a person of color, and also identifies as queer. And she has an article, I'm happy to throw it in the chat, about access intimacy. And access intimacy is a term for, you know, this feeling. And when you think about the word intimacy, you know, we're not talking about what, you know, in a sexual way. We're talking about there's a connection and a relationship that's developed when you as a person with a disability come into a space where you feel welcomed. You don't have to look for the signage. You don't have to look where the restroom is. You don't have to, you know, try to figure out where the entrance is. You don't have to figure out the programmatic inclusion piece or call the professor ahead of time. Like, where all of your access needs are met, it creates a really intimate connection and a belonging in space. And so what we seek to do with all of our inclusive, interdisciplinary move, walk, audits is to highlight what that actually means, because everyone has needs and we want to meet those needs. How do we elevate the perspectives of all people and all users? Because we often use the term of equity, but we often forget about a very significant percentage of the population, 20% to be exact, 1 in 4, 61 million, 1 billion strong globally. And you know, we cannot use that type of language without including the largest segment of the population, right? And in that segment of disabled people or people with disabilities, however you identify, is the intersections of race and gender and all the different. And so whether you acquire your disability, whether you're born with your disability, or you age into disability, these are perspectives that are critically important for aging in place and in space, and for all of our collective futures. And so much learning has gone on, and I'm so grateful for the leadership and guidance, Mark. So many of our colleagues, Kathy, the CDC, I mean, Chris Kaczynski, and when he was still here, I mean, this was his brainchild. I mean, and Meg, I mean, for being an incredible, and your team, for being an incredible ally and co-conspirator in these spaces, and really, really elevating these conversations in the lanes that so many people with disabilities don't have the privilege of having yet. So I will leave you with that. Thank you so much for including me in all these conversations. I mean, it's been an absolute privilege to work with all of you. You're on mute.
You're still muted, Meg. Meg, you're mute. Sorry.
Sorry, I got a little verklempt there, Mark. Thank you. I love you too, Karen, and I really have just enjoyed today and getting ready for today. And thank Emily so much. This is a part of a larger agenda that I only can imagine to be possible with the energy of students and our Centers for Independent Living and Public Health and our national partners. There's so much to be done, and thank you all for keeping us optimistic and moving forward. With much appreciation, we're out. We'll be following up and letting you guys know about some new next opportunities to be using this important tool to learn about our communities together and plan for the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.